Thank you very much, John. El segundo conferenciante que tenemos hoy es William Friedman, es el director del Arnold Arboretum de la Universidad de Harvard. William Friedman trabaja en el departamento de biología evolutiva. Él estudia precisamente la evolución de distintas especies, en su caso las plantas, y los cambios en su morfología. Así como antes hablamos de la creación de nuevas propiedades en materiales, yo creo que ahora podemos hablar de la creación precisamente de nuevas especies, esta vez no por el hombre, sino por la propia naturaleza. Eso es un tema suficientemente interesante, yo creo, para que viniera aquí a Passion for Knowledge, pero yo creo que hay una razón adicional, o dos razones adicionales. Por una parte, William Friedman ha estado muy comprometido con lo que es aumentar el impacto social de la ciencia, y en su caso del Arboretum, que dirige en la Universidad de Harvard, y además yo creo que una de sus aficiones es intentar buscar la belleza en la actividad científica que él está desarrollando, como creo que podremos ver en la charla que va a presentar a continuación. Así que, sin más introducción, William, please.
Well, I want to first thank all of you for doing something that I might not have done on such a beautiful day. I think I might have chosen to be on the beach thinking about the perfect temperature, the beautiful blue water, and I just cannot believe that so many people would choose to come into this dark hall. But I'm deeply appreciative that you have done so, and I hope that I can at least make you want to return to the outdoors in the next few minutes. Traditionally, there have been a number of people who have spoken in this wonderful festival who are chemists, who are physicists, engineers, what we would call the hard sciences. I'm a botanist. I study plants, and as the director of the Arnold Arboretum, one of the world's most wonderful jobs, I get to be with plants almost all the time. And so I want to talk a little bit about not necessarily what's new. In fact, I hesitate to tell you, I'm going to start with some information that's about 2,000 years old. This is a beautiful poem that was written by the Roman philosopher Lucretius on the nature of things. And this is something quite remarkable when you think that this is 2,000 years old. He writes, "For time doth change the nature of the world. One state of things must pass into another. Nothing remains the same. All things move on. All things does nature turn, transform, and change. One thing decays, grows faint and weak with age. Another grows and is despised no more. So therefore time, the whole nature of the world changes, and one state of the earth yields place to another." It's really the most beautiful early passage about evolution that you could possibly find. And as an evolutionary biologist, I realize that while we're here together today, for me, I remember that we're here not only together today here in San Sebastian, but also that we are all the product of about almost 4 billion years of evolutionary history. And its starting point, you can think about our current Earth, but Earth was born a little over 4.5 billion years ago, and originally was rather inhospitable. Hot, quite a few asteroids, and I might add, for something that's important to us, no oxygen. So imagine a world without oxygen, and you can imagine a world without us. Just last week, a major step forward was announced in Nature or Science, I don't remember which, about now pushing the age of life back another 200 million years. We now have evidence in these little pieces of rock that you can see behind me. It looks like a little mountain range. And you might think, well, I'm showing you the Pyrenees or something like that. But in fact, I'm showing you a microscopic or small signature of what are bacterial communities that leave behind layers of minerals that actually stick around for a very long time. There are no fossils in there, but they're distinctive of the kind of life that was photosynthetic and bacterial 3.7 billion years ago. Importantly, this kind of life was the life that began to take water, split it, and actually create oxygen. And so this was an event, if I think of my own self or any of you, that was necessary for the human condition to even exist. Now I'm going to talk about very deep time, and then we're going to actually move through different scales of time. And we're going to come to the level of time which is very, what I would like to refer to as ephemeral, fleeting, fast, over quickly. So 3.7 billion years ago, life evolves. And you might ask, well, what life was there on land? Well, it took another 3+ billion years before anything showed up on terrestrial Earth that was alive. Other than microbes, there might have been some fungi, there may have been some algae, but by and large, 500 million years ago, all of life was really in water, in the seas, in the oceans, in the lakes. And then a single lineage of wonderful algae from a freshwater lake system began to evolve the adaptations that allowed them to progressively encroach on land and actually begin the story of plants as we know them, what we see every day in our lives. So if you think about this in terms of a clock, life is very old, 3.7 billion years. For the vast majority of that time, all of that life was basically confined to water. And out of a 24-hour day, plants only showed up very close to midnight, about 475 million years ago. What did these first plants look like? They actually might not be something familiar to many of you, but there are groups that are still alive. They're called liverworts, and they just basically grew along surfaces, flat green bodies of photosynthetic tissue. So there were no trees. There was obviously no Arnold Arboretum because there were no trees. And within the next 50 million years, plants began to grow upright. And they grew upright in such a way that you had what looked like stems, and they branched, no leaves yet, no roots, just stems. And 400 million years ago, if you were here in San Sebastian or anywhere in the world, this is what you might have seen on land. Small axes of plant material up to about 1 meter in height. It took a number of years, and when I say a number of years, I mean tens and tens of millions of years more, before the first trees evolved. And this is a wonderful story I won't dwell on today, but I can tell you that trees, arborescence, involve the ability to increase in girth to support a plant body. And 5 different groups of plants acquired the ability to become trees in a mere 10 or 15 million years. We see wonderful evidence in the fossil record. Now you may say, well, trees are one thing, and these trees I'm showing you here are extinct, but what about flowers? Well, I love flowers, roses, whatever you might think. They're actually quite recent, only 130 million years ago for the first flowers. So out of the period of time that plants have been on land, only a quarter of that time have there been flowering plants. And that's quite remarkable. Now I'm going to jump to another level of time scale. We've gone from billions of years to millions or hundreds of millions of years. Now I want to talk about thousands of years. And it's important to remember that 20,000 years ago, for example, here in San Sebastian, there were very different conditions. This was not a good day to go for a swim 20,000 years ago. This was Arctic tundra. And in Boston and at Harvard University, we were under a lot of ice. There was nothing growing there. There was a great glacial sheet that covered up most of North America. So you have all of these different timescales, and now I'm going to jump from thousands of years to hundreds of years ago and the birth of my institution, the Arnold Arboretum. This is a young institution when you think about billions of years. It's an old institution when you think about botanical gardens. But about 144 years ago, the first director and a great landscape architect, the same man who designed Central Park in New York City, designed Harvard's Arboretum. It makes a magnificent landscape. And they had this plan to create a museum of living plants and trees that people could study and also could come and see. And here you can see very early, if you come to our plants, you can see all of them have tags. Very early on in the 1880s, people began planting lots of trees at the Arnold Arboretum. You can see here another date. This is 1904, a wonderful ginkgo tree. Here's 1908. Here's one that's really wonderful, 1948, a tree that came from China just the year before the Chinese Revolution changed power and the communists came to rise, and it was no longer possible for the Arboretum to explore in China for another 40 or 50 years. Now I'm going to jump to another time scale. So I've talked about hundreds of years and decades. But if you took this tree, and I did not cut this tree down, but one of its relatives on our premise was struck by lightning. And so we did cut it down. It died. You see that in the growth rings of every tree is a record of history, of environment, of water, of temperature, of all kinds of things. And it is within this wonderful little spot between one ring and the next ring that I want to focus our attention for much of the remainder of the talk. So there are all these scales, and within a year, there are many things that make up a year of our lives. There are seasons, there are things that happen on a daily basis, and I want to explore them. And one of the things I want to do is to actually show you that I'm not the first to think about the temporal nature of plants or of life. Let me now refer to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe in one of his most beautiful poems about life. Joyfully deliberating, striving in the years long past to understand how, in creating, nature lives, I saw at last, ever the one itself revealing, as a myriad ephemera. Plurality, the one concealing, governed each by inner law. Everlasting, evanescent, inaccessible yet near, formed, transformed through change incessant, clothed in wonder, I am here. What he's saying is that as long as we may think that life has been here or that nature is ancient, there is still an aspect of life which is formed by ephemeral events, the events that last for a second or a day. And if you think about that in our own lives, we may count our birthdays in years, but each year is a series of small, maybe some big events, but series of millions of things that we ourselves are conscious of, maybe others aren't. So for the last many years, as I've been at the Arnold Arboretum, and this is the Arnold Arboretum from a satellite, it's a very big botanical garden, about 1.5 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. My office is fortunately right there in the Arboretum, and I happen to live right across the street from the Arboretum. And so what I've been doing is going into the Arboretum to catch the ephemeral, the fleeting, the momentary, the things that we often don't see. And over the last 3 or 4 years, I asked my IT team to ask, where have I been? And we have all of the tags on each of the plants. Every dot is a picture or many pictures of a single plant in our 15,000 trees that I've photographed in the last 4 years. Each one is a little tale of obsession of my own, and I hope that I can inspire you with a few of these stories to think about how this might be incorporated into your own lives. So the beech tree wakes up. The European beech is a common tree. All of you have certainly been near a beech tree in your lives. And you know in the spring, if you were to look at the very end of each stem, you would see a long cigar-shaped bud. That's how we know it's a beech tree. And it's been like that all winter long. There's nothing particularly exciting. And probably if you were to think forward just a minute, you would say, the next thing I know is all of the leaves are on the beech tree and it's green. But there's a point in between which if you go and look for it, you will discover something extraordinary about nature. This is when a bud bursts forth, and what you will see here, it takes maybe 2 or 3 days on a whole tree. Inside that bud all winter were all of this year's leaves. Every one of them was made months and months and months ago. They've been sitting, waiting for a signal from nature to open up and explode. And here we see that bud, and you can see the brown parts, excuse me, I'm going backwards, right here. And there's the first leaf emerging. There are going to be another 10 leaves. Each one of those leaves is wrapped in red. It's actually sunglasses or sunscreen to protect the young, tender leaves from the sunlight and burning the photosynthetic chemistry. Those little red structures that protect will be gone in a matter of days. And if you look carefully, you'll see them under the tree, gone forever. Here's another picture of the same plant with 2 leaves out, and the young leaves are wrapped, every one of them, inside of these little red structures. And again, 3, 4 leaves, and you see the red structures. And if you catch the perfect day, you can look into the sun at these young leaves and have it filter through and see the folding that's still growing as these things unfurl from their tight constraint within the bud all year long. It's a magnificent thing to see a tree open a bud. And I might ask, how many of you actually looked at this? But you've walked by it every day. In fact, you've walked by it all of your life. And then the tree becomes green, and you might say it's the steady state, it's the same. But what about in the fall? What European beech have you seen in the fall? Well, that event I just showed you of bud break lasts just a few days, 2 or 3 really for peak. If you were going to go, you'd have to catch it then. The same is true in the fall. Like a stained glass window in a cathedral, the perfect day for a European beech tree is really just 1 or 2 days in a whole year. And if you catch it, it is absolutely magnificent. And this beech tree, which is at the Arnold Arboretum, is a very special beech tree because it's a mutant beech tree that was collected once in France. It's not tall like most of your beech trees. It's actually called the tortured or tortuosa beech tree, and I will show you why. Inside, all of the branches have a mutation that make them go around in beautiful, beautiful forms. And you can look up into this tree when you come to the Arnold Arboretum and be alone under that canopy, and it is a transformative experience, extraordinary. And then, just a couple days later, it's gone. The ephemeral is gone, and for another year, you have to wait. The beech tree goes to sleep, and this is all that remains. And this is the next 6 months until those buds open up again. Now, this is something you can do here, and of course, you can go to any forest where there are beech trees and see this, but you don't have to look at a beech tree. You could look at any tree. I'm going to tell you about another obsession of mine, and this is about pine cones. And pine cones are something that we would mostly say are brown and woody. If you walk along the coast here, you see beautiful pine trees, you see their cones, and you think, I know a pine cone when I see it. This is a pine cone. This is one from California. It's brown, woody, has some seeds in it, and it's like this for a long period of time. Here's a wonderful Chinese pine, and this is green. And actually, there's a moment in the fall, in a period of 4 days, that it goes from what you just saw to that. 4 days, green to open, closed to open. 4 days, won't happen again for another year. But what I am after every spring is something quite remarkable, and all of you can see this if you just look. What does that pine cone look like in the spring when the tree wakes up? It's purple, it's red, it's pink. So here we have a beautiful Japanese pine cone. It will become brown. For just a week, it is this magnificent color. Here's another pine relative, the Douglas fir. It's bright pink. There are hundreds of thousands of these trees all over, billions of them, that people walk by all the time, and they don't know that for 1 week, this is what you can see, something magic that nature reveals to you, as Goethe said. And 1 week after that pink cone is there, let me show you what it looks like. It's gone. Completely ephemeral, very short. Here is your larch, the wonderful, we call it European because we're in America. You would just call it the larch tree. But have you ever seen the larch tree cone when it's young, when it buds out? That's the red of a larch tree. And imagine a tree with hundreds, if not thousands of them. Here's the Siberian larch in pink. And one of my most startling discoveries, I was just walking in the Arboretum, is this Norway spruce cone in pink and yellow. Almost reminds me of raspberry and lemon. And it was just there for 3 days. I went back. It was a little bit there, but mostly completely gone. So this has been an obsession of mine, to go out and see what these very rapid events do and how they affect me, and also the kinds of questions that they make me ask. So now I'm going to tell you a third tale of obsession, and this has to do with rhododendrons and necklaces of pollen. Many of you will have rhododendron plants. They're shrubs in your gardens, And I can assure you they're not uncommon. You can buy them almost anywhere. They're very beautiful and they flower. One day I went walking. I had my camera in hand, and it had just rained. Everything was wet. You can see in this picture the flowers covered with rainwater. It was a magnificent day, the moisture in the air, the sense of the beauty of the flowers. And I looked at this, and you can see there the middle parts of a flower. These are the reproductive parts of the flower. This is where pollen is made, and then eventually pollen is brought to the female parts to create a seed for the next generation. Now, I had read about rhododendron flowers as a student when I was at Berkeley as a graduate student 35 or more years ago. But I'd never seen them. I had not seen them. Because when I looked this one day, this was last year, I noticed something very strange. Each of the structures you're looking at here, right here, is where the pollen is made. And this is where the pollen's supposed to come out and stick to an insect, and that insect flies and brings the pollen to the next flower where it actually fertilizes the next generation. But it looked like little necklaces, like I'd been to Tiffany's, only under a microscope. And I looked a little bit more closely. These are just pictures I took with my camera in my pocket that I brought. And you see these beautiful necklaces that are pouring out of each of these pollen structures, cascading down. I then realized I'd never seen something that I'd read about, but as it turns out, it's common. It's all in, everyone who has a rhododendron plant, this is in your yard. This has only been studied once in the history of all of botany. There is one paper on it, and it's just a bare paper that merely describes the fact that there are strings of pollen grains that come out of the structures. And this is what they look like under a microscope. If you pour them out, you see this beautiful circle. And then you can actually take that necklace and put it on a microscope slide, and it stretches out. You can imagine someone with a beautiful necklace around the neck, and it would be a magnificent thing. And yet each one of these pollen grains is tied to its neighbor, and you can see with little filaments, just like in a necklace. It's magnificent. Now, this is beautiful, and you may say, well, all of this is nice to see. Does this have anything to do with the nature of science? Well, of course, as a scientist or a botanist, as I think of myself, we're always asking why and how. And one of the things we might ask is why and how should it be that pollen grains are stuck to each other in these beautiful necklaces? Well, we have wonderful equipment at the research labs, and I can assure you that in that wonderful equipment in the research labs, we have cameras that can actually photograph 1,000 pictures per second. That's fast. And so what we did is we set up a machine that vibrated the pollen structures in the lab, and here is a movie I'm going to show you of what happens. This is 1,000 times per second, so we're slowing it down so that you can see how pollen gets shaken out in this movie from a single structure. It's magnificent. Now, you may ask, why would I have chosen to make a movie like this where I shake pollen out of a structure in a flower? Let me show you another movie. This is another camera we have that is not as large, and we can actually take it out onto the grounds. This is a bee landing on a rhododendron flower, flying, stops. Watch now, the wings are not flying, but he's vibrating the flower at about 220 times a second to shake pollen. So now we have this wonderful story of coevolution. We have the bee, who's going to leave in a minute, the shaking of the pollen as it comes out and attaches itself to the insect to go to the next flower. And these are the kinds of things that no matter how many times you read about them, they only become real if you go looking for them or you have the eyes that finally, and mine took 35 years before I could see. Now I walk by everyone's rhododendrons in their yards, and when I see someone with a rhododendron in flower in their yards, of course, I'm pretending I'm the bee, I'm shaking pollen out, and out it comes in a perfect chain. But for 35 years, I was blind. And this is an important thing to be conscious of. And this is something that Goethe also thought about, and I think he put it beautifully when he said, "To wander about among a vegetation which is new to one is pleasant and instructive. It is the same with familiar plants as with familiar objects. In the end, we cease to think about them at all. What is seeing without thinking?" And this is something that the human condition requires. At some level, we cannot have all information come in. We have to process some, we have to exclude some, but in many ways, we have to understand that we often do exclude, that we are blind to nature around us. And Goethe was correct. It takes a willful effort to see nature, to see plants, to do more than walk by them and say that they're in a park and that they're green, to see a red pine cone, to see a bud break, or to see a pollen string necklace come out of a rhododendron flower. Now, why is this important? I'll ask this question. What can the simple act of seeing accomplish? Well, to begin with, it can change the world. And if you don't believe me, I have good historical reason to make this argument. This is Charles Darwin as a young man, and as many of you know, right after he came out of college, he spent 5 years going around the world on the voyage of the Beagle, mostly spent time in South America, in exploring the coastline and the interior. There's the voyage, you can see the Beagle. He went and he saw. He went from a college education that was really in many ways hypothetical, the kind of learning from books and lectures that only goes so far, and he was transformed by being able to take that information, but then to go and look. And what did he see when he went? He saw a world of insects that were there throughout South America, throughout other places like New Zealand. He saw fossils, he saw birds, he saw plants, things he'd never seen. He kept notebooks, he thought about this. And after 5 years on the voyage of the Beagle, of seeing, of actually seeing and thinking, he went back to England, got an apartment in London, and began a series of notebooks. And he asked what he saw, what did it mean? And in 1837, he understood that what he saw meant the world wasn't just diverse, it was evolutionary. And this is from his private notebook. What looks like a tree, a genealogy, is his idea that all of life is related by a genealogical set of links. And here we have the difference between book learning and the awareness of what nature can tell us if we observe. This could not have happened to Charles Darwin if he hadn't gone on the Beagle, if he hadn't been able to take that time to see. And 22 years later, he changed the world with the most important book ever published on the origin of species, which convinced us, all of us, that the world was an extraordinarily beautiful place that was the product of change, as Goethe would have said, change incessant, of diversification and genealogical link. Now, he did more than that. He went on, after publishing On the Origin of Species, to publish many books on plants, which I'm quite pleased to note for all of you. And he did a book on the pollination biology of orchids right after On the Origin of Species. He was fascinated by the movement of plants, how plants climb, how, if you think about the beautiful things that you might grow in your garden, he wrote a whole book about climbing plants. He wrote a book about plants that eat animals, insectivorous plants. This is Charles Darwin. He wrote about plants that actually had different forms of flowers on one type of plant and why they might have some different kinds of flowers on a single plant of a single species. And then one of his later books, he actually wrote a book with his son Francis on movement of plants. And this is about movements that are very rapid or very slow, but the point was he wanted to know when plants wake up in the day and they move their leaves up and they go to sleep at night, but he wrote a whole book. Now, where did Darwin go to do most of the research for these groundbreaking books? Each one of them is incredibly important in terms of the history of science. Well, you may think he must go to a big laboratory and perhaps a museum. No. All of the work he did for those books was done at home, and best of all, it was done with his children and his wife. They were part of his experimental group. That was his team. They were done in his backyard. They were done in his little greenhouse. When he wanted to study earthworms, he went to his own yard and then wrote a whole book about earthworms. So what can the simple act of seeing accomplish? In Darwin's case, and I would argue in anyone who is a practicing biologist now, observing nature is where we get our questions. And if we see, nature tells us what those questions are, and we go about solving them. But I think beyond science, what the simple act of seeing can accomplish is also important in a personal sense. It can change you. You do not need to be a scientist and make a living as a scientist to be someone who observes nature and who can enrich your personal life by observing nature. So I'm going to end with just a few things that just are what happens when you go out on a winter day after a snowstorm and look at the bud of a walnut tree. This may seem almost mundane to many, but if you do this every day, or you do it every other day, or when you walk to work, or you go across to a cafe, or you have lunch here, if you just take a minute to stop and look at a plant, you may be surprised that you begin to form a connection with that plant. And that is a connection not on human terms, but on the terms of two organisms that share the earth and must live together in some harmony. Some days when I walk in the Arboretum, there's been a big storm. In this case, a plant I'd wanted to see with beautiful red bark had been blown over, just a big branch. And there, set across the white snow, was a blood-red twig. It changed my mood. It made me ask why it's red. It made me think about the beauty of this whole system, why the storm in its own way was extraordinary to think about. Here's a plant that I love. It looks like it has little baby embryos at its tip. But in fact, it's a very special tree that doesn't have any winter buds. It goes to sleep each winter with all of its leaves outside. And each one of those in the spring turns into a great big leaf, and it has no protection. And actually, I have a PhD student who's working on the evolution of what are called naked buds. But what about this? This is just a plain old pine relative breaking bud. The Fibonacci series is here. All of the spirals, I could describe this mathematically. It happens all the time. You have all walked by this. It's there to be seen, and it is extraordinarily beautiful. Or plant defenses against a blue sky. Or the flowering of winter witch hazels. In America, we have these flowers. This is a Chinese species, actually, and they flower in January. So that sense that spring may be coming can be arrived at by looking at. Or a willow tree when it actually begins to go and shed its pollen in March or February. Or the moment that I was actually walking by a magnolia and I took a series of pictures and in flew a bee on his way. I didn't intend for this to happen, but I was trying to see what would happen, and it happened. It changed everything. It made me feel connected with the bee, with the plant, with the fact that all of us descend from the same common ancestor 3.7 billion years ago. We are all relatives on Earth. And here I'll finally close with a couple of pictures. This is an oak tree, an acorn. All right, nothing special about an acorn. But actually, this acorn is missing its cap, and it has a wonderful cap. And one day I looked down under the tree, and there was this cap, looking like a wooden bowl that had been sculpted. And I looked closely, and there was this, like a sun, these rays from the cap were coming out, set against a leaf. So it wasn't even on the plant anymore. Now you might ask, well, do I have to go to the Arboretum to see that oak? Well, the answer is no. This morning with my colleagues, I went for a walk here along the harbor, and I went to the beautiful Paseo de las Cuas. I have it written on my hand, so you can tell that I'm practiced. And I saw some beautiful oaks, and I saw this oak, which is a relative of the one I just showed you. Now, it's still on the tree, and it's green, but if you go back along that path in about a month, on the ground, you will see this. And you have probably stepped on them and never held them in your hand and asked, what does it mean? How do I connect to this? But there it is, and there's my GPS, and that's what I was looking at when I went by this beautiful oak at about 12-something this afternoon. So what can the simple act of seeing accomplish? I would argue it can connect you and situate you in nature. And this is deeply important. In a world with human-induced climate change, in a world where people kill each other over differences of opinion or politics, in a world where pollution is going to choke out much of our biodiversity, in a world with so many challenges, I believe the first thing that has to happen is that we have to remind ourselves that we are one of many species, and we have to begin to appreciate the beauty of all of these other species. It may be for me plants, it may be for you fungi and mushrooms, it could be bacteria, it could be that you love geology. But the point is, you need to relate back and forth to nature. And if you can do this, it seems to me you will do exactly what Charles Darwin was arguing in 1859, understanding that we are only one of many species, all related and interlinked, sharing a planet, and importantly, because we're human, we must steward and protect that planet. As Darwin ended on The Origin of Species with the most beautiful sentence ever written, "From so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved." Thank you.